When I was thinking about what I wanted to say, I guess in reflection to this talk, I actually started by thinking about the article that I wrote that's called Parental, what is it called? Something about parental mediation theory for the digital age. So it was the first time that I was using the word theory in a title. And I actually, when I was thinking about writing it, I went to one of my friends who's a quantitative researcher in the United States and said, well, how can I see, can I actually talk about this as a theory? Because I can't find anywhere that people have talked about parental mediation as a theory. And so we had a conversation about when does a concept become a theory? And that was when I started to think about how differently we approach the idea of what theory is. And I think the idea of then launches a second question, which is, and where in the research process does theory enter into your discussion? And so I think that one thing that might be helpful is to think about three different approaches that we have to theory. One is the social science approach, which I think is where my colleague was coming from when she was helping me to think about how parental mediation might be thought of as not only a concept, but a theory, because it had a lot of evidence behind it. And so the idea of social science, I think the metaphor might be kind of like of a bricklayer, that as a theoretical social scientist, you're laying brick upon brick of theoretical bricks. So you're actually recognizing that there are existing theories that are bricks, and then you're kind of building the next, building a wall of theory with various bricks. I think another approach to theory that we use in our fields, especially in the humanities side, is the social theory approach, which I guess when I was thinking about metaphors again, I was thinking of how in that case, it's often like opening an umbrella of theory that explains phenomena or processes on a large scale, and also provides a sense of comfort because you kind of recognize it. Oh, yes, we live in a risk society, or yes, I understand there's a process called mediatization. So it's sort of a much broader kind of a sense of that then may be tested out in various ways, but it also is compelling in a certain way, and much more meta in terms of trying to make some kind of broad explanation. And then I think the third approach that I wanted to mention that I've been thinking about a lot is critical race theory, post-colonial theory, feminist and indigenous theories. And if we're going with the idea of metaphors, I guess I would say this is where you're using a shovel to unearth assumptions that existing theories have built on. And you're building then using that same shovel to build an alternative structure of theory. So you're deconstructing, but then you're also reconstructing some other basis for how we think, and trying to examine epistemological assumptions. So I think I just wanted to, as I mentioned in the small group kind of workout, I was thinking really about the issue, the problem of how in many ways, we talk about theory in a very practical way. And I think the toolkit is a wonderful example, and is going to be especially helpful for doctoral students who are trying to get a grasp on what has happened in the past in any of those different buckets of how we think about theory, to use another metaphor, but how we can then try to see ourselves within some kind of a larger framework or larger ways that these questions of children and the internet have been discussed and debated in the past. And so I'm really excited about the theoretical framework. And as I mentioned before, I think one of the challenges from being in the United States perspective is that theory is not only practical, but is increasingly politicized, or can be politicized. And that we've seen that happen. And as we talked about in relation to Frances Haugen, who was the whistleblower within Facebook, and how her ideas, her evidence of what has happened in Facebook has evolved and has fed into a lay theory about the negative effects of Instagram on young people. I think another one that I've been paying attention to quite a bit, obviously, is the issue of critical race theory being politicized in the United States, and how Fox News in particular is this entity, along with conservative radio in the United States, that has picked up on this idea of theory as something that is problematic and is radical and is undermining systems of thought in a way that is perceived as particularly negative. So I'm really interested in that and very concerned about that, not because I think that I think a toolkit like we're talking about will be really useful for what we are doing, but I feel like a later question that I'm grappling with as a person who's been working with scholarship for a while is when and how do we enter these conversations about theory that has become politicized? And I think that's it's a very challenging question for me, and I think that it is one that relates to these issues of how we think about children and their right to have space and to have access to conversations. Because I think in the United States context, in many places, we do not have the approach that embraces children's rights and the right for children to actually participate in political conversations or in conversations of civic spaces, or even in conversations about any decisions that affect their lives, whether it's in their school setting or elsewhere. So I think there's a lot at stake in terms of how we think about our role in relation to theory and what role we need to play. So I hope that the toolkit can be a place to continue those conversations, but I want us all also to be mindful of the fact that whatever we intend for the audience of this theoretical toolkit, that there will also be other and alternative audiences that we may not be thinking about or anticipating, and that we want to consider that as well, and think about our own role as how can we find places, even if they're places of conflict, that can be points of entry where we can enter into a conversation and reframe conversations. And I think that takes a certain amount of courage and bravery that I don't feel like I have been particularly good at, but I really admire Sonia in this, because I think she's been able to do this by having conversations with policymakers. So I do hope that this toolkit will be a way for us to have conversations, and then to also think about how can we be courageous in our theories as well, in terms of thinking about how will we continue to influence the public conversation and the stakeholders who are willing to talk with us.